In a small town, a 16-year-old girl, towering at over 6 feet 7 inches, stood out with a giant frame that set her apart from everyone else. She was shunned and mocked by classmates and neighbors alike, even having trash thrown at her by those who saw her as a monster. But one afternoon at the park, she risked everything to save a young child who had fallen into the water. Her brave act was captured on video and quickly spread, changing her life forever. Amara Johnson had always known she was different. Standing at 6 feet 10 inches by the time she was 16, she towered not just over her classmates, but over most grown men in their small southern town of Willow Creek. Her skin, a rich and gleaming shade of deep mahogany, her broad shoulders, her strong arms, everything about her seemed to command space. Yet Amara had never felt larger than life. If anything, she spent most of her days trying to make herself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. But Willow Creek noticed. They noticed everything. The town was the kind of place where children played barefoot until sundown, where church bells marked the passage of time more than clocks, and where anything that didn't fit the narrow mold of normal was treated with suspicion, or worse, hostility. People whispered when Amara walked by, children stared, and adults pulled their little ones closer to them as if her very presence posed a threat. In the supermarket aisles, in the school corridors, even walking past the white-clapboard houses with their picket fences, Amara felt their eyes on her. Heavy, questioning, fearful. At school, it was no different. Classmates avoided sitting next to her. Teachers hesitated before calling on her, their eyes darting nervously toward her massive frame. Group projects were nightmares. No one wanted her on their team. The lunchroom, once buzzing and alive with chatter and laughter, fell into an awkward hush when she entered. It was as if her very being drained the room of familiarity, as if she were some strange anomaly they couldn't quite accept. Yet every day, without fail, Amara's parents sent her out into the world with love stitched into their every word. Her mother, Elise, would pull her into a warm embrace each morning, smoothing her daughter's thick curls with the same tenderness she had when Amara was just a baby. "You were made for something greater, baby girl," she'd whisper against her forehead. "The world might not see it yet, but one day they will." Her father, Marcus, a tall and kind-made man with a quiet strength, would clap her gently on the shoulder before she stepped out the door, his voice steady and sure. "Stand tall, Amara. You carry greatness in those bones." And so Amara did. She carried herself with a deliberate gentleness, careful not to knock over desks, careful not to lean too hard against doors, careful not to take up more space than necessary. But inside, every day felt heavier, as if she were dragging a boulder of loneliness and rejection behind her. She clung to small joys where she could find them. A perfectly ripe peach from Mrs. Simmons' stand at the farmer's market, a book from the library with worn pages and forgotten corners, the humming warmth of her mother's cornbread fresh from the oven. These were the little lights she pocketed, the tiny embers that kept her moving forward. Yet as much as Amara tried to tell herself that kindness would win out, that patience would mend the cracks between her and the town, there were days when the burden felt unbearable. Days when a glance lasted a second too long, when a whispered word cut deeper than a knife, when even the sun seemed to avoid shining on her as she walked down Main Street. Still, she reminded herself of her parents' words. She whispered them under her breath when she felt the world pressing down. She remembered her father's hand on her shoulder, her mother's forehead pressed to hers. "Stand tall. You are special. One day they will see." In her heart, Amara clung to that fragile hope like a lifeline. Because if she let go, if she ever truly let go, she feared she might crumble into 1,000 tiny pieces, scattered and forgotten by a town too small to understand the size of her spirit. In the quiet weeks that followed, Amara moved through the streets of Willow Creek like a shadow, careful and unseen. She woke each morning with the same silent promise tucked into her chest, to be gentle, to be helpful, to be the kind of person her parents believed the world would one day recognize. But every kindness she offered seemed to slip through her fingers like mist. It began on a golden afternoon, the kind when the sun painted every rooftop with a warm, forgiving light. Amara was walking home from school, her backpack swinging lightly against her side when she spotted Mrs. Langford, standing stiffly beneath the wide branches of an old oak tree. Her face was twisted with worry, her hands fluttering helplessly at her sides. High above, her mangy orange cat clung to a trembling branch, mewling pitifully. Amara hesitated at the corner, her heart thudding low and heavy. She could have kept walking. She could have looked away, as Willow Creek had so often done to her. But something deeper rooted her steps, a stubborn echo of her mother's voice reminding her that kindness mattered even when it wasn't returned. She crossed the street slowly, raising her hand in a cautious wave. "Ma'am," she called gently, "would you like me to help?" Mrs. Langford barely spared her a glance, her lips tightening into a thin, distrustful line. After a long moment she gave a curt nod. Amara approached the tree, moving with a careful grace, mindful of her size, her strength. She reached up, her arms easily spanning the distance most would need a ladder to cross. But the cat, sensing the towering figure looming beneath, shrieked in terror. In a flash of panic it scrambled higher into the branches and disappeared from sight. Before Amara could even lower her arms, Mrs. Langford's anger erupted. "You scared him off," she snapped, her voice sharp as a whip. "Big clumsy thing, always ruining everything." Each word was another stone hurled against Amara's chest. She stepped back, stammering a soft apology that was swallowed by the cold air between them. Mrs. Langford turned her back in dismissal, leaving Amara standing alone beneath the heavy branches, her heart cracking in places she thought had already hardened. Still, she refused to let bitterness take root. She pushed forward with the stubborn belief that goodness, if given often enough, would eventually find a place to land. A few days later she found another chance. Mr. Green, her neighbor across the fence, was struggling on his front porch, trying to wrestle a large ceramic flower pot down the steps toward the garden. His movements were stiff, unsteady, and Amara, watching from her window, knew she could not let him struggle alone. She crossed the yard quickly, hands outstretched in offering. "Sir, let me help you," she said, her voice threaded with careful hope. Mr. Green grunted, neither welcoming nor refusing her, and together they lifted the heavy pot. For a moment, balance was theirs. But Amara's hands, too large and too clumsy for the delicate curve of the pottery, shifted wrong. The pot wobbled, slipped, and shattered against the porch steps with a sickening crash. The silence that followed was thick and brutal. Mr. Green's face flushed dark with rage. "Look what you've done," he roared, his voice slicing through the quiet street. "Get out! You're nothing but trouble." His words struck deeper than the shards littering the ground. Amara mumbled a choked apology, her eyes burning, and backed away, her arms wrapped tight around herself as she turned and fled toward the safety of her house. Behind her, the pieces of the broken pot glittered in the fading sun, a cruel reminder that even her best intentions could not survive this place. She spent the following days trying to avoid the eyes that followed her everywhere, but even the sidewalks and narrow doorways seemed to betray her. Her broad shoulders clipped door frames, her long arms knocked over signs, her heavy steps rattled loose boards. In the cramped shops and tight alleys of Willow Creek, there was no room for someone like her to move freely, no space where she did not feel like an intruder in her own hometown. Every stumble, every awkward apology, every weary sigh from a passing stranger carved deeper into her spirit, until it felt as if she were carrying the entire town's disappointment on her back. She tried to tread lighter. She tried to make herself smaller. But it was never enough. She was never enough. Or worse, she was too much. Yet still, each evening when she returned home, her parents welcomed her with arms wide open, their faces etched with pride and unyielding love, as if they could see in her what no one else would. And so, battered but unbroken, Amara endured, even as the walls of Willow Creek seemed to close tighter around her. The morning sun rose heavy and gold over Willow Creek, casting long, drowsy shadows across the sidewalks and warming the bricks of the old market square. It was a Saturday, the day when the whole town seemed to pour itself into the streets, weaving between colorful stalls, trading gossip and fresh vegetables under striped awnings. Amara walked carefully through the crowd, her canvas bag gripped tightly in one hand, her mother's shopping list crumpled and damp with sweat in the other. She had promised herself she would move quickly, avoid notice, slip through the market like a ghost. Her head bowed, her footsteps light, she kept to the edges, her heart thudding with every glance that brushed against her towering frame. It happened without warning. Near the flower stall, where the scent of daisies and marigolds hung thick in the air, a small boy broke free from his mother's grasp and darted into Amara's path. The boy looked up, his wide blue eyes locking onto Amara's face. And then, with a scream that ripped the soft morning apart, he stumbled back, shrieking in terror. His cry drew every head in the square. For a long, breathless second, the world seemed to freeze. Then came the shouting. "Get her away from here!" a woman shrieked. "What is that thing doing around our kids?" someone else barked. The crowd turned, a wave of fear and anger crashing over Amara. Rotten fruit and soft tomatoes, pebbles and discarded scraps flew through the air. She flinched as a bruised apple struck her shoulder, as a handful of wilted lettuce slapped wetly against her side. She raised her arms to shield her face, stumbling backward as voices rose louder and harsher around her. "Buster, freak, get out of here." The words clawed at her, tearing through the thin layers of resolve she had managed to build around herself. Blinded by tears, Amara turned and fled, her bag forgotten, the list fluttering from her hand and vanishing under the stampede of feet. She ran down the narrow streets, her chest burning, her breath ragged, her whole body trembling under the weight of shame and despair. Every window seemed to watch her, every door seemed to shut in her face. Willow Creek, the town she had called home all her life, had finally, fully turned its back on her. She didn't remember bursting through the front door of her house. One moment she was running through the heat and dust, and the next she was collapsing onto the worn living room rug, gasping for breath, her body racked with great heaving sobs. The walls, once warm and familiar, seemed to close in around her. The bright patterns on the wallpaper, twisting under the haze of her tears. Her mother was there in an instant, her arms wrapping tight around Amara's shaking frame, rocking her gently as if she were still a small child waking from a nightmare. Her father knelt beside them, his face tight with worry, his hand steady on Amara's back. She clutched at them both, desperate for something solid, something safe. "I can't do this anymore," Amara choked out, her voice raw and broken. "I can't stay here. They hate me. They'll always hate me. I just want to leave. Please, please, let's go somewhere else. Somewhere no one knows me, somewhere I can just be invisible." Elise pressed her lips against her daughter's temple, her own tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She rocked Amara back and forth, murmuring soft, wordless sounds of comfort. Marcus cupped the back of Amara's head with one large, gentle hand, grounding her, anchoring her to the love that had never wavered, even when the world outside had turned cruel. "Baby," Elise whispered finally, her voice trembling but fierce. "You were not made to disappear. You were made to shine." Amara sobbed harder, shaking her head, but Marcus's voice joined hers, low and sure. "They're afraid, because they don't understand," he said. "But their fear is not your truth, Amara. It never was. You are not a mistake. You are not a burden. You are a blessing." Amara buried her face deeper into her mother's shoulder, trying to believe them, wanting to believe them, but feeling the weight of the world pressing hard against her ribs. Elise pulled back just enough to frame her daughter's face in her hands, her thumbs wiping away the tears, her eyes burning with conviction. "You are strong enough to bear this, even when it feels unbearable," she said. "You are brave enough to stand tall, even when the world tries to cut you down. One day they will see what we see. One day they'll understand. But until then, we see you. We love you, and that is enough." For a long time they sat there, the three of them, bound together in the quiet hum of a love that refused to break. Amara's breathing slowly evened out, her sobs fading into shuddering hiccups. Somewhere deep inside her, beneath the bruises and the hurt, a tiny ember stirred, weak but stubborn, refusing to be extinguished. She wasn't ready to face the world again. Not yet. But in her parents' arms, she found enough strength to keep breathing, enough strength to believe, if only for one more day, that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly who she was meant to be. Days slipped by like leaves floating down a slow river, each one carrying a little more of Amara's sorrow, a little more of her determination to stay unseen. She avoided the market, avoided the park, avoided anywhere the sharp eyes of Willow Creek might land on her. Yet there came a Sunday afternoon, too warm to stay locked away, when her mother gently nudged a worn paperback into her hands and said, "Go find some sunshine, baby, you need it." Amara hesitated at the door, the memory of rotten fruit and cruel words still raw against her skin. But something soft and aching inside her wanted to believe that the world beyond her front porch might still offer some kind of peace. She tucked the book under her arm and walked toward the town park, her steps slow, cautious, deliberate. The park was nearly empty, save for a few families picnicking under the sprawling oaks and a handful of children chasing kites in the soft, warm breeze. Amara chose a quiet bench near the edge of the small lake, half hidden by a cluster of dogwood trees, and sat with her book resting gently on her lap. For a time, she let the hum of distant laughter and the rustling leaves soothe the raw edges inside her. She lost herself in the worn pages, in the safety of a world where heroes were judged not by the way they looked, but by the strength of their hearts. She didn't notice the little boy at first. He had been playing near the water's edge, chasing a bright red ball that bobbed and rolled in the breeze. It wasn't until she heard the sharp, panicked cries of a woman, "Evan! Evan, get back here!" that her head snapped up, her eyes scanning the park. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the child stumble, arms flailing, slipping off the muddy bank and plunging into the lake with a small, sharp splash. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Parents gasped, froze, paralyzed by the horror unfolding in front of them. The boy's tiny head bobbed once, then again, his hands splashing weakly as he struggled to stay above the murky water. The bank was too steep, the water too deep for a child so small. Amara's body moved before her mind could catch up. She hurled her book to the ground, her legs pumping against the soft earth as she sprinted toward the lake. Her long strides ate up the distance in seconds. Without hesitation, she plunged knee-deep into the water, the coolness shocking against her skin, but she pressed forward, her towering height cutting through the depth that would have swallowed anyone else. The little boy's head slipped beneath the surface just as Amara reached him. She lunged, her long arms slicing through the water, grabbing him around the middle and lifting him high into the air. His small body was trembling, soaked, gasping, but he was alive, clinging to her neck with tiny, desperate fingers. With steady, powerful steps, Amara carried him back toward the shore, where a cluster of wide-eyed parents had finally found their feet and rushed forward. Gasps rippled through the gathering crowd. Mothers clutched their children to their chests. Fathers hovered helplessly. The woman who had screamed, the boy's mother, fell to her knees in the grass, her arms outstretched, tears streaming down her face. Amara gently handed the boy over, her hand shaking only slightly now, the adrenaline thrumming under her skin. For a moment, there was only silence. The mother cradled her son against her chest, sobbing into his wet hair, and the crowd simply stared. At Amara's dripping clothes, at her towering frame, at the hands that had saved a life where no one else had moved. Somewhere, someone pulled out a phone. A camera shutter clicked. Another, then another. Amara stood there, unsure what to do, her heart hammering against her ribs, the weight of every past hurt pressing against the fragile hope blooming painfully in her chest. She turned without a word, her head bowed, and retrieved her soggy book from the grass. As she walked away, her clothes heavy with lake water and mud, she didn't see the whispers spreading through the crowd. She didn't hear the murmured words. Astonishment, gratitude, wonder, beginning to rise where once there had only been suspicion and fear. Behind her, in the quiet hum of new beginnings, a video was already uploading to a dozen social media feeds under the caption, "The Gentle Giant Who Saved a Life." And though Amara did not yet know it, the tide in Willow Creek had begun to turn. It started quietly, almost like a breeze brushing through the town before anyone noticed it was there. That night, As Amara sat curled up on the worn couch in the living room, still damp from her walk home, still cradling the waterlogged book against her chest, Willow Creek was waking up to a version of her they had never seen before. The video. The grainy, hastily filmed clip of a giant girl rushing fearlessly into the water, lifting a drowning child into safety, her soaked frame standing tall and unwavering, began to ripple across social media. First it was shared among the town's private Facebook groups, parents tagging one another, adding hearts and wide-eyed emojis. Then it spread wider, catching the attention of local news stations, their headlines painting Amara not as a curiosity, not as a menace, but as a hero. The gentle giant who saved a life, they wrote, and with every repost, with every whispered retelling, the town's cold, brittle image of Amara Johnson began to fracture. The next morning, Amara didn't know what had changed. She woke to the same morning sun spilling across the kitchen floor, the same scent of coffee brewing in the air, the same ache sitting heavy in her chest. She thought the world beyond her door would be just as it had always been, unforgiving, suspicious, small. But when she stepped onto the porch to fetch the morning paper, she found a basket of fresh muffins sitting on the stoop, a folded note tucked beneath it. "Thank you for saving Evan. We're sorry we ever judged you. The Parkers." Mara stared at the basket, her heart stuttering painfully against her ribs, unsure whether to trust what she saw. She carried it inside with trembling hands, showing her parents, who simply smiled and told her, "Sometimes, baby, the world just needs a reason to open its eyes." As the hours unfolded, more small miracles appeared. Mrs. Langford, the same woman who had once spat words like daggers at Amara beneath the oak tree, shuffled awkwardly up the driveway carrying a tray of lemon bars, her hands trembling not with age this time, but with something that looked like guilt. She didn't stay long, she didn't say much, just a muttered, "Thank you," and averted eyes. But Amara accepted the gift with a grace that seemed to astonish the old woman even more than the rescue itself. At school, the changes were harder to believe. Whispers still trailed her down the hallways, but now they were different, softer somehow, tinged with curiosity instead of fear. A few classmates, kids who had once avoided her table like it was cursed, now hesitated near her locker, offering shy, tentative smiles. In biology, one of the boys she barely knew leaned over during lab and said, almost in a whisper, "That was really brave what you did." His words were clumsy, but in them Amara heard something she had almost forgotten how to recognize: respect. Even Mr. Green, the gruff neighbor whose broken flower pot had once seemed the final insult, appeared one afternoon leaning against the fence between their yards. He didn't call her over. He didn't apologize. But he lifted one gnarled hand in a silent wave, and Amara, standing tall in the soft golden light, raised her hand slowly in return. It wasn't perfect. Not everyone changed. There were still stares, still sidelong glances, still those who clung stubbornly to their fear like armor. But for the first time, Amara felt something shifting beneath the surface of Willow Creek, something warmer, something alive. Where once there had been walls, there were now doors left slightly ajar. Where once there had been silence, there were now cautious hellos, tentative thank yous, murmured invitations to sit, to stay, to be. Each day, she stitched these moments into the fabric of her heart: the mother's tearful thank you, the bakery owner's free cookie slid across the counter with a wink, the little girl who ran up to her in the park, threw her arms around Amara's legs and said, "You're my hero," before darting back to her parents with giggles trailing behind. For Mowring carried it all with a kind of reverent wonder, knowing that change was slow, knowing that acceptance was not a sudden flood but a series of tiny, stubborn drops wearing away at stone. And through it all she remembered her parents' words, the ones spoken in the quiet after her darkest hour, that her light was never meant to be hidden, that her spirit was not a burden to carry but a gift to offer. She stood taller now, not because the world had told her it was safe, but because she had learned that her worth was never theirs to measure. For the first time in her life, Amara Johnson moved through the streets of Willow Creek not as a shadow, not as a ghost, but as a living, breathing testament to the power of kindness, of resilience. of choosing to stay open even when the world slammed its doors. And as the late autumn sun dipped low over the rooftops, casting the town in a wash of amber light, Amara smiled. A small, quiet smile, but one filled with all the weight and wonder of a girl who had finally begun to believe she belonged. Autumn deepened in Willow Creek, the leaves crisping and curling into shades of gold and fire, the air sharpening with the promise of winter. Life in the town moved in its familiar rhythms. Children racing down sidewalks with backpacks flapping behind them, elders sitting on porch swings wrapped in patchwork quilts, the scent of burning wood drifting through the streets. Yet underneath the everyday hum, something had shifted, something subtle but undeniable, and Amara could feel it in the way the town breathed when she walked by. No longer did she sense the tightening of shoulders or the hurried closing of doors. Instead, she caught nods from the mailman, warm smiles from the woman at the grocery store, cautious greetings from people who once looked through her like she was made of smoke. One Saturday afternoon, Amara sat on the same bench by the lake where everything had changed. The water was calm, brushed silver by the gentle wind, and the trees along the banks were crowned in color, their reflections shimmering across the surface. A little girl, no older than 6, skipped past, her pigtails bouncing, and without fear, without hesitation, she beamed up at Amara and said, "You're the lady who saved the boy." Her voice was bright with admiration, pure and unguarded. Amara smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached all the way to her heart. "I just did what needed to be done," she said softly. The girl's mother offered a shy wave from a distance, a small act, but to Amara it felt monumental. She returned the wave, feeling the steady warmth of acceptance settle into her bones like a long-missed sun. She had not changed who she was to earn this. She had not shrunk herself or folded into something more acceptable. She had simply stood her ground, carried her heart forward even when the weight of it seemed too much to bear. And now, slowly, quietly, the town was learning to meet her where she stood. Later that evening, as the sky darkened into a soft purple and the first stars began to blink awake, Amara walked home along the quiet streets. She passed Mr. Green's house, where he sat whittling wood on his porch. He lifted his hand in greeting. She passed the bakery, its windows warm and golden, and Mrs. Langford inside, handing out lemon bars with a rare, almost embarrassed smile. She passed the park where children now played freely, their laughter bright and unafraid. As she turned onto her own street, the old oak tree came into view, its massive branches etched black against the fading light. The same tree where once she had been cursed for trying to help now stood like a silent witness to all that had changed and all that still could. Amara paused, tilting her head back to look up at its towering height. She realized then that she had never truly been alone. Her parents' love, her own stubborn hope, the quiet bravery stitched into every step she took, these had always been enough to carry her through. Standing there, tall and unshaken in the cooling evening air, Amara understood that belonging was never something she had to earn by being less of herself. It was something she created moment by moment by refusing to hide her light, by daring to believe in her own worth even when no one else did. The world might not always be kind, it might not always understand, but she was ready now, not just to endure it, but to live in it fully, fiercely, without apology. Because Amara Johnson, the girl once called a monster, a freak, a mistake, had found her truth, etched not in the smallness others tried to force upon her, but in the boundless strength of standing tall, standing whole, exactly as she was. And as she turned toward home, her step steady, her heart unbowed, the stars above seemed to shine just a little brighter, as if lighting the path for a girl who had never stopped carrying the light inside her. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.